Affairs Bureau, the Office of Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, and the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell to understand how these three entities work together to safely bring home Americans who have been detained or held hostage overseas. And I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. I would like to take a moment to recognize the families and now those who are my friends I've had the opportunity to get to know over this year and other years who are here or are at home watching. Many of you participated in our roundtable recently on detained Americans and are the reason that we are here today continuing this drumbeat. I'd also like to recognize the Kamal Maz family. We're all devastated to hear that Majda had died while being held hostage by the Assad regime. We're all very sorry for your loss, and we marvel at your family's strength. It's something that none of us really can understand going through until we have. Today we push forward with him in our prayers as we work to bring every American home. The American detainees that we discussed at our roundtable are just some of those that are around the world that are being held. And while I'm glad that we have gotten other Americans home in recent years, I have many questions about whom the Biden administration has prioritized and who was left behind. Why did President Biden trade Victor Bout, the Russian arms dealer who conspired to kill Americans, for Brittany Grenier, but failed to secure Paul Whelan or Mark Vogel's release at the same time? These are questions that Americans want to know the answer to. Why did President Biden trade 5 Iranian spies and provide easier access to billions of dollars in exchange for 5 Americans, but other Americans were left behind? These are questions that Americans and families want answers to. The administration pays attention to famous and politically well-connected, but there are those that feel that those that are not politically famous or well-connected don't get the same treatment. Americans want answers to those things. Those whose loved ones are with us today must fight tooth and nail to get meetings. And I know that the individuals that work in these fusion cells, these individuals here, I can attest for them that they spend hours, late nights, early mornings, whatever it is, to speak to the families of hostages whenever it is that they have a question or need to hear about something. But there are lingering questions that remain. I spoke with our witnesses before this hearing, and it is to your testament that you communicate regularly with families, but we cannot deny the powerful testimony from those who feel that their loved one's case is not prioritized by or even in the mind of the president. That's their feelings. That's how they feel. And I hope today we can identify why that is and present solutions for declassifying information if need be, or providing more substantive status updates if that's what assists the families, and ensuring that the families have access to the full suite of the U.S. government to help them through these not just, quite often not difficult days or weeks, but more often months and years. I'm also deeply concerned that Americans are increasingly becoming targets overseas because foreign adversaries have seen that the U.S. government will cut deals. In 2015, the Obama administration established Presidential Policy Directive 30, PPD 30, which says that the U.S. government will make no concessions to individuals or groups holding U.S. nationals as hostages. It is the United States policy to deny hostage takers the benefits of ransom, prisoner release, policy changes, or other acts of concession. The policy goes on to state why this is important, because it protects U.S. nationals and strengthens national security by removing a key incentive for hostage takers to target U.S. nationals, unquote, stopping the practice and denying malicious actors money, personnel, and resources. In these deals with some of our most dangerous adversaries, the Biden administration has directly negated this policy, and as policy warns, may be incentivizing malicious actors to detain Americans as leverage for money or personnel or for other resources. Venezuela, Iran, Russia, China, and others have gotten exactly what they wanted simply by taking Americans hostage and waiting for the administration to make an offer or negotiate in a number of different ways to the offer that is finalized. I am sure we will debate that point, but we cannot deny that Americans are targeted by our adversaries. So I would also like to hear about the deterrence that we are offering so that Americans are not detained by our adversaries. 1, 5, 10 years from now, What will we have done to assure Americans walk this earth freely without fear of wrongful detention, because our adversaries know that the full force of the United States of America will come crashing down on them if they harm our American citizens? As we speak, dozens of innocent Americans are wrongfully detained or held hostage around the world, including 8 who were taken by Hamas during the October 7th terrorist attack. Each of them should know that an American is coming for them. Whether it's an American diplomat or an American door kicker, it should be known that there is an American coming for you if you are held abroad. I look forward to working with all of you to ensure that you have what you need to cut through the bureaucracy and bring Americans home. I know this is work that tears at your heart as you're working with them, because you do have to speak with the families on a daily, weekly, nightly, monthly, whatever it be, basis, and have to carry the burden of somebody is detained under your watch. And so I do look forward to hearing what you have to say about this, understanding the personal nature in which you are tied to your work. In that, I now recognize Ranking Member Crow from Colorado for any opening statement that you may have.
Thank you, Chairman Mast, for organizing this important hearing. I'm grateful for your partnership on this issue and for taking on board my suggestion from last year that we hold a public session on this deeply challenging topic. I also want to thank our distinguished witnesses for being here today and for the work that you and your teams do every day on behalf of the American people and the families of those detained or held hostage. Your jobs are not easy, but the entire nation is grateful for your service. And finally, before I lay out what I hope we can achieve with today's hearing, I want to address the families directly, of which we have many in this room today. I want to acknowledge that no amount of empathy that we express and no promises anyone makes today will change the fact that your loved ones are not here with you right now. It won't change the fact that instead of sitting with you around the dinner table tonight, they are held hostage in prisons far from home. I know that no matter what we say when we leave here today, that fact will remain. Nevertheless, I want you to know that we stand with you, that your voice and your advocacy matters, and that we will fight for you and with you for your loved ones with everything we have until you are reunited. So for today, one thing I'm hoping that we can accomplish is to better understand, with the help of our witnesses, number one, what do we do to warn Americans about traveling to certain high-risk countries? So prevention on the front end. If a detention happens, how do we arrive at the appropriate determination? And what is that? What are the different determinations? And then what are the timelines for those determinations? And what did the determinations unlock in terms of resources and support for families as well? Third, I would like to hear from you an honest assessment of just how big of a threat this is. How many more Americans are being affected today as compared to years prior? And I hope with my colleagues here that we can do this in a nonpartisan way. I come to you all with open mind and open heart to have a robust discussion about a difficult area in an area that we can always improve on. But I want to make clear also that every single president, everyone, Republican and Democrat, has engaged in deals to return Americans. So I hope that we don't make this into a partisan exercise looking at one party or one president over another, because every president, rightfully so, has made deals and has done everything to return Americans. And I just wanted to provide that context at the outset. So with that, I look forward to the discussion today and return back to you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Crow. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We are pleased to have a distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this important topic that lead the charge on what we are discussing today. First, we have the Honorable Rena Bitta, who is serving as the Assistant Secretary of Consular Affairs. We've had the opportunity to speak numerous times. It's good to see you back here again today. From 2016 to 2020, she was the U.S. Ambassador to the Lao People's Democratic Republic and has held many senior consular affairs positions, such as Consul General in the Ho Chi Minh City, Consular Chief in Amman, Jordan, and Non-Immigrant Visa Chief in London. Next, we have the Honorable Roger D. Carstens, who is serving as the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs since 2020. Prior to his time there, Ambassador Carstens was Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights, and Labor, and Ambassador Carstens is a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel who served in Special Forces, but most important to Mr. Crow and myself, served in the 1st Ranger Battalion. Rangers lead the way. And lastly, we have Mr. Rajiv Maan, who is the Director of Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell at the FBI. Mr. Maan began his career in law enforcement in 1994 and since has dedicated much of his career to counterterrorism matters. Thank you for being here, each and every one of you today. Your full statements will be made a part of the record. I'll ask you to keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow time for member questions. And I now recognize Assistant Secretary Bitter for her opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and members of the committee. Thanks to all of you for the opportunity to discuss the State Department's highest priority, the safety and security of U.S. citizens abroad. In the Bureau of Consular Affairs, we are the public face of that effort for millions of Americans every year. Today, more Americans than ever before have passports and can travel internationally, more than at any time in our history. If any of our fellow citizens encounter an emergency overseas, including an arrest or detention, it is our consular teams who are on the front lines supporting them. However, the role of the Bureau of Consular Affairs in serving the traveling public actually begins before Americans leave our borders. The most important way that we fulfill our responsibility to U.S. citizens is through our public travel advice. Our travel.state.gov website, which gets more than 700 million hits every year, features country-specific pages where Americans can find up-to-date, unbiased information about their destination so they can make informed decisions about their safety and security while traveling abroad. On these pages, we make sure Americans are aware that they're subject to local laws when traveling abroad, and we highlight ways in which local law may differ from our own. Nevertheless, last year about 6,000 U.S. citizens were arrested around the world on charges ranging from minor infractions to murder. In these cases, our goal is to ensure that U.S. citizens receive the fairest possible treatment under local law and that they're being cared for appropriately by local authorities. We seek immediate access and visit U.S. citizens as soon as we're aware of the arrest. We provide lists of English-speaking lawyers, translators, and other support. We'll make sure that their medical needs are being met, and if they want, we'll make sure that they can be in touch with their families. Throughout the pretrial phase of any U.S. citizen's detention, we conduct regular visits and maintain close contact with their lawyers and family to ensure that the case is progressing normally under local law and to assure no abuse or mistreatment. We do this for any U.S. citizen, regardless of the nature of the crime they're accused of. Throughout our close monitoring of each American's case, our embassy officials, who are familiar with legal systems in their host countries, continually review the circumstances of the detention to ensure that the American is fairly treated under local law and to detect whether there are any Levinson indicators that might suggest wrongful detention. This monitoring does not stop at the pretrial phase. Last year, our officers made 7,600 prison visits to detained Americans, including 1,700 prisoners serving long-term sentences abroad. Of those, the Secretary has determined a handful to be wrongfully detained. In helping the Secretary make that determination, the Bureau of Consular Affairs is a partner in what is a whole-of-department effort involving, at a minimum, the Bureau of Consular Affairs, the Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, our missions abroad, and our partners in the State Department's regional bureaus. Again, the Secretary of State makes the ultimate determination, and once he does, the lead is transferred from Consular Affairs to SPIHA. When the Secretary makes a wrongful detention determination and Ambassador Carstens and his team lead the department's efforts to seek release, our consular officers continue their visit to these detained Americans to advocate for their health and welfare. We do so till the moment any U.S. citizen, wrongfully detained or not, and regardless of the nature of the crime, is released and comes home to their family. As I mentioned, there are 1,700 U.S. citizens serving prison sentences overseas, As a proportion of the department's caseload, wrongful detentions are quite rare. In most places that U.S. citizens travel to, the risk is almost non-existent, and to return to the top of my comments, is reflected in our travel advice. Here, I want to also address the families. We know whatever statistics we provide do not provide comfort to U.S. citizens who are arrested or to their families under any circumstances overseas. We can assure them, though, that whether their family member is determined to be wrongfully detained or not, that our posts overseas are monitoring their situations, their well-being, and advocating for the best possible treatment during what we know are very difficult times. Thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, ma'am. I now recognize Ambassador Carstens for his opening statement.
Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and members of the committee, thank you for holding this hearing. I've spoken to many of you before, and I appreciate the attention and support Congress has given to Americans held hostage and wrongfully detained overseas. My name is Roger Carstens, and since March of 2020, I've had the honor of serving as the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, or SPIHA. The work we do in my office is hard. One of the hardest but also most rewarding parts of this job is connecting with the families of Americans held captive, and especially with the returnees when they come home. I see that many of them are in the audience behind me today, and it's good to see them here. The average person does not understand the amount of pain that families go through. It's a daily thing, and every day is tough. They're wondering whether their loved one's health is failing. Are they being mistreated? Are they being fed? Are they ever going to come home? In many of these cases, these families suffer through this for years. I'm grateful for the relationships that we've built with these families, and building a trust-based relationship with these families and the U.S. government, that's a win. But the only time you really win is when an American who's been held captive steps off a plane onto U.S. soil and falls into the arms of one of their loved ones. And it's a special thing to witness. A husband and wife reconnect, a mother and son, a father and daughter. It's so personal and intimate to watch that you almost feel like you should avert your eyes and look away. It's the only time that we can say that we've actually got our job done. This gets to the bigger picture of why we're here today. A fundamental value shared by everyone in this room, and I hope every American, is that we all care for the well-being of our fellow Americans. Which brings us together is the U.S. government's commitment, and yes, the obligation, to secure the release of our fellow Americans held captive around the world. And that's what's at the heart of today's hearing. SPIHA and the broader hostage recovery enterprise was created in response to tragic events 10 years ago. Terrorist groups, including ISIS, abducted Americans, subjected them to deprivation and torture, and tragically murdered them in the most inhumane ways possible. And then, when the family members of these Americans reached out for help, the U.S. government did not have ready responses, did not operate in transparency, and in some cases even threatened them with prosecution for providing support to terrorists as they considered options to bring their loved ones home. These tragic deaths of Americans were a wake-up call. In 2015, President Obama fundamentally changed the U.S. approach on hostages and wrongful detentions. He created SPIHA, as well as the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell and the National Security Council's Hostage Response Group. These groups within the executive branch, together with Congress, the families, civil society groups, the private sector, the media, and others, make up the hostage recovery enterprise, a group of individuals and organizations committed to bringing Americans wrongfully detained and held hostage back home. In SPIHA, I have three primary missions. 1, bring home American hostages and wrongful detainees. 2, support their families. And 3, come up with a way to prevent, deter, and otherwise counter bad actors from engaging in this horrific practice. Congress has been a vital partner in our efforts to bring Americans home. The 2020 Levinson Act codified SPIHA and also provided discretionary criteria for the Secretary of State to make wrongful detention determinations. Today, when an American is detained abroad, our consular officers know to look for indicators that the detention may be wrongful. If the Secretary of State determines that it is, we make all the appropriate efforts to bring that person home. Every wrongful detention case is unique. Sometimes the facts are clear and we can quickly determine that a detention is wrongful. More often, we have limited access to a country, its decision makers, or information, and it takes time to get a full picture of what's going on. It's important that we get this decision right. If we do not, we risk jeopardizing the legitimacy of other cases and could make it more difficult to get other wrongfully detained Americans home. We ultimately need to end the practice of hostage diplomacy. The United States is not the only country to have its citizens arbitrarily detained for political leverage. The nature of this problem is global, and so, therefore, should be the solution. As we work with like-minded countries to develop a collective response for now and the years ahead, we are confident that if we get a critical mass of partners together to raise the cost of using foreign nationals as bargaining chips, we will be able to effectively deter bad actors and end arbitrary detention as a tool of diplomacy. If you come away with one message today, I want it to be this. If you're an American and you hold a blue passport and you're wrongfully detained or taken hostage overseas, your government will work to secure your release. We will partner with your family, providing resources and information about your case. The Biden administration has brought home 47 Americans, and this accomplishment was only possible with the bipartisan support of Congress. I welcome the opportunity to answer your questions.
Thank you, sir. We now recognize Director Mon. Recognize you for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Mast, Ranking Member Crow, and other members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having me here today. I am FBI Second Chief Rajiv S. Mon. I'm the director of the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, the HRFC. The HRFC is the government's dedicated interagency coordinating body at the operational level for the recovery of U.S. nationals held hostage abroad. In 2014, the Obama administration called for review of U.S. government's response to hostage taking. This was initiated following public outcry from families whose sons and daughters were taken by terrorist organizations overseas and felt frustrated the United States government was not doing enough to bring the loved ones home and poorly communicating with them about those efforts. The hostage review policy looked at 4 areas: government coordination, engagement with families and external stakeholders, intelligence sharing and collection, and U.S. policy response to hostage taking. As a result of the review in 2015, the President issued Executive Order 13698 and Presidential Policy Directive 30. The Executive Order and PPD 30 established the HRFC along with the Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs, SPIA. This was further established under statute, Robert Levinson Hostage Taken and Accountability Act. The HRFC consists of professionals from the FBI, Departments of State, Defense, Treasury, Justice, and U.S. intelligence community. The HRFC's primary responsibilities are to identify and recommend hostage recovery options and strategies to the President through the National Security Council. Coordinate efforts of the U.S. departments and agencies to develop and execute strategies, including on potential recovery options as well as engagements with families. Assess and track all hostage takings for U.S. nationals abroad and provide regular reports to the President through the NSC. Provide a forum for intelligence sharing. Provide appropriate support and assistance to hostages and their families in a coordinated and consistent manner, and provide the families with timely information on their cases. Make recommendation to the executive departments and agencies to reduce the likelihood of U.S. nationals being taken hostage abroad, and coordinate with departments and agencies regarding congressional, media, and public inquiries pertaining hostage events. The HRFC coordinates with the SPIA's office on all diplomatic lines of effort. One of HRFC's most important component is our family engagement team. Headed by our family engagement coordinator, this interagency team consists of FBI victims service coordinators, operational psychologists, case agents, crisis negotiators, as well as State Department consular affairs officers. The team directly engages with and supports families, providing information, crisis intervention, and appropriate resources and referrals to families affected by hostage taking. Our family engagement team is also the lead node in collaborating with families as we develop comprehensive strategies for the successful recovery of loved ones. There are 2 main instances in which the HRFC is the lead for developing a strategy for recovery when a U.S. national is taken abroad. First is when a U.S. national is being held against his or her will by a non-state actor, such as a terrorist group or network. This individual is designated as a hostage. The second is an unacknowledged detainee. That is when a U.S. national is being held against his or her will by a state actor or non-state actor, and they have not acknowledged to the United States, to the family, or other entities they are holding the person. We work very hard with our host countries to establish and maintain good relationships all over the globe. We work closely with interlocutors and SPIA in diplomatic efforts. In my 28 years in law enforcement, I've never seen intelligence collection and sharing, as well as interagency cooperation, the way the hostage enterprise is now. Intelligence analysts are vetting shared intelligence. Law enforcement officers from the FBI and other agencies are looking to lead, and the families are included in the process the way they were not 10 years ago. It is a great honor to be part of the HRFC. HRFC is grateful for the strong support of Congress, in particular this committee. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm available to answer any questions you have.
I want to thank all of you again for your testimonies, and not just here, but your willingness to do a classified testimony with our members as well following this. It's going to be very important for a number of the questions that can't be answered in here to be answered in the SCIF. So thank you again for your willingness to make time for that. I'll now recognize Ranking Member Crow for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. There's a debate that is often raging on the Hill about the trade-off between making deals to return hostages or the wrongfully detained, under the understanding that the United States should not leave people behind, versus the notion that making deals might incentivize folks to detain more Americans. So I would love your views on that issue, and whether you think we should continue to try to find ways of making deals when necessary to get our people home, and the impact of us stopping that policy on your jobs, and how you think we would address that if we were not to approach deal making.
Ranking Member Crow, I hope you don't mind if I jump in and take that
Yeah,
first.
please. Mm-hmm.
These are always hard decisions. I think you take a case like what we had to do in Russia or what we've done in Venezuela. We actually spend years sometimes trying to divine what the other side wants, having very tough conversations with them. At times we come up with options that we present to the other side that are either given a yes, no, or a maybe. And as we struggle to get through this, at times you'll find that it's going to be that one thing that's going to make this trade come home. Either you do it or that person doesn't come home. And in some of these cases, it's turned out to be a person-for-person trade. In some cases, like Venezuela, for example, we've brought home well over 15 people for the trades of 3 different people. The 2 people on one occasion and one Venezuelan on another has resulted in the return of multiple Americans. To an extent, it's always unpalatable because the decisions are hard, but really the alternative is those Americans don't come home. But in doing this, we have very vigorous discussions within the State Department, the interagency, and we even asked the intelligence community to opine to get a sense that if the United States returns someone who's held by the U.S. to their home country as a part of a trade, we want to get a sense of what level of danger they present to the United States and its partners and allies after their release. In the cases that we've made the decisions, we felt reasonably comfortable that the person going back would not have some sort of residual threat to the United States and our partners and allies. And though the deals are tough, again, it brings Americans home. Why did the other side usually ask for criminals who've done some pretty evil things? It's hard to determine, but I do know that at the end of the day, we value the individual and we get that individual back. They might value the hardened criminal or drug trafficker and they get that person back, but an American goes home to their family.
Any other thoughts on that?
Thank you, Ranking Member Crow. I'll just add that this is something that we think quite a lot about, and one of the ways that in working with Roger that we try to support the efforts is through our travel advice. The travel advice is meant to provide unbiased, up-to-date information so Americans can make good decisions about their safety and security abroad. We recently added an indicator for countries that do participate in wrongful detention so that Americans at least can be aware. Again, there aren't that many countries that participate in this, but where there are, we're trying to make sure Americans are aware before they travel.
Mr. Mann.
Sir, the SPIA's office is a lead role in wrongful detention, but for hostages, we too, the HRFC as well, puts out advisories through our outreach to businesses, faith-based groups, and other members to travel advisories to warn them of such travels so they're not taken hostage or detained abroad.
Okay, and with my remaining time, there's often a misunderstanding between hostages and wrongfully detained and what will set off a wrongful detention determination. Would one of you be able to just provide a very quick high-level synopsis of the differences of those two in what tracks one case in one direction versus another?
I'll see if I can be quick in case someone wants to jump in. So essentially, a wrongful detainee, that's someone that's taken by a nation state. For example, Russia, China, Iran. A hostage is someone that's taken by a terrorist group. Think ISIS, think JNIM, or something along those lines. In terms of the wrongful detention, information comes into the State Department, and we sort through it and look for these indicators of wrongfulness. Oftentimes, that information comes from the embassy forward, but it also might come from family members, the intelligence community, the media. As that information comes in, we start to build a case and try to create a picture to determine whether that's wrongful or not. And if the information, and taking a look at the totality of the circumstances surrounding that case, indicates wrongfulness, we send it up for the Secretary of State to render a decision. Rod, you might want to cover the hostage side of the house.
And by wrongful, you mean that there isn't actually a legitimate reason for somebody to be detained, that they haven't committed a crime or something within that country or area. Is that accurate?
Ranking Member Crow, sometimes they actually might have done the crime, or there might be some ambiguity. We're not entirely sure. But in taking a look at the Levinson criteria provided us by Congress in the 2020 Levinson Act, we're able to kind of wrestle with that. So even though someone might actually be guilty of something, or there might be some ambiguity, it could be the way that they've been treated, the fact that they didn't have fair trial guarantees, the fact that their human rights or their fundamental rights were violated. In the totality of those circumstances, it might start to give the feeling of wrongfulness, and that's when a case would go forward. And
So
once
it
someone's
could be,
determined,
even if there is an underlying crime or act, it also includes process. If there isn't a legitimate process as well, that could cue off the wrongful detention determination.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And once someone's determined to be wrongful, at that point, the whole weight of the U.S. government can start advocating for that person's return. Prior to that, prior to wrongful detention, the cases stay in the Consular Bureau, and Assistant Secretary Rena Bitter will manage that case. And I don't know if you want to talk about the cases that are not yet wrongfully detained.
Sure, I'll just highlight one thing, although Roger covered it quite well, and I do want to give Roger a chance to weigh in. When somebody is wrongfully detained, as Roger says, it's the weight of the U.S. government really advocating for their release. If somebody is not wrongfully detained, if they have committed a crime, if they're under the totality of the Levinson circumstances, under those totality of the circumstances, there's no indication that they're wrongfully detained, then what we're doing is advocating for the fairest treatment under local law and for their well-being and for the best possible treatment that they can obtain.
Thank you. That's helpful. I'm out of time. I thank the chairman for the additional minutes. I yield back.
Absolutely. Chair now recognizes Representative Moran for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of the witnesses here today for this important discussion. My heart simply goes out to all those men and women abroad that are being detained inappropriately and to their families. I know it's a great burden on each one of those families when this happens. Ambassador Carstens, I want to start with you and ask you a couple of questions, in particular about some adversarial countries like Iran and Venezuela. Tell us what we are doing specifically to take away the incentives for hostages to be taken in the future.
Congressman, I appreciate that question. We think deterrence is very important. We've got to come up with a way that raises the cost for these countries taking our citizens. I think it's going to take some time to build it, but I think we're already on that glide path that one day will get us to the point where we raise the cost so high that they'll stop taking our citizens. Right now, we're working with our partners and allies, most specifically the Canadians, who through their arbitrary detention initiative have brought countries to the fore, signing the Declaration Against Arbitrary Detention State-to-State Relations, currently signed by 76 countries in the European Union, trying to reestablish that norm that taking citizens and using them as political bargaining chips is just not something we should be doing. We've also established, along with the Canadians, an independent legal panel made up of high-level jurists who can start looking at some of the legal remedies that we might have to also put this problem to rest.
And let me ask you about one of those. One step that might be taken is creating an official designation for maybe what's called, quote, state sponsor of arbitrary detention. Is that something you guys have discussed within the agency?
I think that's being discussed right now by the independent legal panel. These are things that we've also talked about with lawyers, not only within the State Department, but the interagency. We've also reached out to places like the Atlantic Council and CSIS to have these legal discussions, because right now there are legal tools available and agreements available that we've not put into the service of stopping this problem. And they're probably ones that we're going to have to tie into. And we may actually be coming back to Congress in the next year or two to ask for more authorities that allow us to have more of a more muscular legal response to this being done.
Yeah, you talked about the Levinson Act earlier. That's one of the tools. Are you using sanctions that are allowed under the Levinson Act to help deter and get back our hostages?
We've done so 15 times. I think you've probably noticed that we've leveled sanctions against groups in Iran. We've leveled sanctions against groups in Russia. We've leveled sanctions against specific individuals in JNIM. And the idea is that if we can level a sanction to get some sort of justice and accountability or affect a return, that's a good move. I have to confess, sometimes it's hard to level a sanction when you're currently in the negotiating space and you're trying to figure out, if a sanction's leveled, what kind of pressure will that bring to bear? Will that get someone back, or will that push that farther away? But to date, we've definitely used that sanctioning authority given to us by Congress.
Have you also considered the possibility of amending the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act to allow for private suits against countries that have a state sponsor of arbitrary detention designation? Have you guys considered that?
Congressman, we've been talking about that for 3 years, and that's absolutely something that we wrestle with. So yes.
What's your opinion about that? Do you think that's a good idea?
I almost feel like I'm wondering if I should say that we wait until we get an official decision on that before I render it. But to my mind, I would lean towards it. I mean, if a country is allowing its, if the country is behaving to the point that it's taking citizens as bargaining chips, that's something that has to be addressed. But I imagine that the greater legal minds, I didn't go to law school, wasn't smart enough to get in, but I imagine that the lawyers that we've employed in trying to research this will come up with an answer that makes sense, and we'll try to progress forward.
I wasn't smart enough either, but somehow I did get into law school. I'm curious also about one other possible tool in your toolbox, because that's really, I think, what we're talking about, is giving you tools in the toolbox to get our hostages back. What about amending Title 18, making wrongful detention a crime, and allowing suits against foreigners in those instances?
I feel like you've been talking to my team, because that's something that we've also been talking about. And I tell you, as we go forward, I don't think we've been shy about reaching out to Capitol Hill. We're happy to work with members of your staff and others to see if we can develop and create some more positive ways to use legal tools in the service of trying to stop this thing. But let me throw one thing at you real quick. To our mind, there is the sanctioning authority, but we feel like there are tools out there across all elements of national power that we could take and put into service of trying to stop this, or maybe we need to come back to Congress and ask for authorities. But it can't just be diplomacy. We have to think in terms of intelligence, the military, law enforcement, economic tools. All elements of national power could probably put, in some sense, into the service of trying to make this go away. And we look forward to working with you and your team as we go forward and explore those.
I agree with those comments, and I think what you'll find on this panel today is this is a very bipartisan issue, and one that we can work together. If there are legislative suggestions, I would ask you to bring those to us specifically so that we can work through the legislative process and give you some more tools in the toolbox so that we can protect our citizens when they are abroad. Thank you all
sir.
for your work.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Moran. Chair now recognizes Ms. Titus for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You heard earlier stated that this administration tends to play favorites, and they will go to save some hostages before others, including celebrities. And I think the basketball player Brittany Griner was mentioned. I'd just like, for the record, for you to tell us whether that is indeed a policy or a practice.
Ms. Congresswoman, thank you for that question. Under the Biden administration, we've brought back 47 Americans, and if you were to take a look at who's come back, you'd find an entire tapestry of what makes this country great. And that is, you will find people that are poor, rich, well-connected, not well-connected, people that are famous, not famous, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, Muslim, Christian, agnostic, atheist. It's this entire array of everyone who makes up our country. And so even though I can understand the perspective of someone who's outside looking in, to my mind, we work just as hard to take care of someone who lives maybe in almost in an economically poor situation in maybe the rural South, just as we would for someone who might come from wealth and who might be connected in the Northeast. We don't care. If that case is wrongfully detained, we are going to pursue it like bulldogs, and we do not prioritize based on wealth or connections or anything else. So we're going to work just as hard for someone who has no connection, no wealth, and no way to think to get it done as we will for someone who might be on the opposite end of the spectrum. This is an American problem, and if you have a passport and are taken hostage or wrongfully detained, you're all my number one priority, and we're going to somehow find a way to get the job done.
Thank you. I appreciate and respect that. You know, as we address the big questions of how to define different categories of people who are detained and how to perhaps disincentivize it and how to serve the people while they're detained, there's some little things that we shouldn't forget. And I don't want to trivialize that, but I just want to bring up something small that could make a difference. You know, when a person comes home, we don't want them to be subjected to a lot of bureaucratic red tape. And one of the things that exists that is astounding to me, because there are waivers for people who are victims of terrorist attacks or natural disasters. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I can't talk. But when a person comes back from being illegally detained, they have to pay late fees on their income taxes. And
I hope you don't mind if I jump in on that one too.
So go right ahead. You know where I'm going with this.
Oh, I do. I mean, I remember driving home one night at like 9 or 10 at night. Yes, I work late. And I was talking to Jason Rezaian, and we talked about this specifically. This had to be 3 years ago. And Jason was highlighting the fact that the IRS wanted him to pay his taxes, and then there were late fees associated with that. And so we jumped right in on that. And within a short time, we have an official liaison from the IRS that my office speaks to quite often, and we're trying to work through those issues. I know Capitol Hill, Congress, you've been working with Jason to create something which takes away those fees that are associated with that. But this is something that's important to us, that when you come back, we're going to help you clean up the admin mess, and we've been working within the entire interagency to address that. But additionally, we're trying to also get ahead of that. We're very grateful for what you've done to give us a push in that direction. So grateful you brought that up. But these are the things that plague us too. One thing that we do is that if someone is declared wrongfully detained, or if they're declared a hostage, at least on the wrongful detention side, we'll provide a letter that they can take to their creditors, they can take it to the bank, and explain that this might not be the person whose credit card you keep charging interest, or someone whose mortgage you closed down, because this has been officially designated as wrongfully detained by the U.S. government. So we're trying to work through all these things. I think we have a lot more work to go, and I personally look forward to working with you and your teams to find better ways to solve these problems.
Well, thank you. I know that you can apply for a waiver, and maybe the IRS will grant it or not, but I think we ought to just put that in statute. And I have a bill to do that. And you see that this is a cross-government approach. You see 3 agencies sitting before us, and I'm glad you have a liaison with the IRS. But I think if we formalize that, we can have it as a policy, and that'll just take one less little thing off the plate that people have to worry about when they come home. Thank you. Thank you for your help on that. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Titus. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Primarily, I'm going to speak to you right now, Mr. Carstens. You have the perspective of, just time-wise, of multiple administrations. And I want to start with this and maybe even go beyond the administrations that you've worked in. Carrots and sticks are things that you deal with in trying to get back those wrongfully detained. And when you look at this, how many of those nations in either administration would you say were recipients of U.S. carrots already, U.S. aid, U.S. grants, U.S. whatever, from a number of different agencies? How many of these countries, that whether it's the 40 plus you've dealt with in the Biden administration or previously, that are already receiving some kind of American support?
Mr. Chairman, that might be a little bit outside the scope of my duties here, but let me see if I can scratch the itch here. Most of the countries, I would say, we don't really have a great relationship. As I think I was joking with you a few days ago, the Canadians aren't taking our Americans. It's usually some people that are a little bit tougher on us. And so we're not necessarily providing assistance or aid to those countries. There are countries like, I think you mentioned Afghanistan, where the United States is working through broader policy issues, and there might be humanitarian assistance, for example, that's applied. But I think in terms of humanitarian assistance, having spent time in the human rights field as well, we're always very interested in taking care of the most vulnerable and by providing them with humanitarian assistance regardless of the situation involved. But I think in terms of tying it into the broader policy, I might actually in a way flip that, and I would say that some of the success that my office has had is by trying to distance itself from some of those broader policy discussions so that we can silo it off and have those conversations that focus purely on the hostages. But your point is well taken.
Not that you have the authority to unilaterally
Correct.
end some level of assistance, but
Yes,
given
sir.
the fusion cell, given everybody, this is a whole of government approach meant to bring all options to bear on anybody that is holding Americans wrongfully. So it still bears as a part of what could be the negotiation. And I would ask one more specific question on this before I move to a different topic. Can you identify specifically any that you have had to deal with in either administration that you've worked in where they specifically rejected the idea of some kind of aid or having some aid taken away from them, said we're not interested in that as a negotiation, we just want this person or this group of persons or whatever?
Mr. Chairman, yes. I've had that happen before. I can think of negotiations where we went in hoping that a certain policy option, in this case we decided a policy option might be the way to go forward, and yet putting that on the table, the other side wanted to conduct a person-to-person swap. I think as we talked, we try to take a look at many options, and at times we want to do something that's not necessarily a person-to-person swap because they're so unpalatable. But I have had times where we've tried something that's a little more policy-related, and the other side's rejected it and pushed us back into the realm of person-to-person swaps.
PPD 30 speaks about incentivizing behavior, right? And we could be incentivizing things in either direction. And so it's certainly a thought that if somebody is rejecting aid as a carrot or is already receiving aid and does not care if that is removed, we should incentivize that behavior, that we will recognize that and make sure that that is removed or never offered to them because that has been their policy. Like I said, I do want to move to something different. If you look again over your tenures, can you give us an idea of how detainment, wrongful detainment, has evolved over the years that you've been a part of this directly or even what you've studied it historically with your predecessors?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think when I was in the Trump administration, we didn't yet have the Levinson Act, and it was more of just trying to make a good calculated guess as to whether someone was wrongfully detained or not. On the hostage side, in a way, a little bit easier because just of the process there, which of course Rajman could talk about. But when I showed up, we had roughly about 30 cases. I think there was a time during the Biden administration that we went up to 54 cases, both of hostages and wrongful detainees. And here's what's interesting, because you talked about that incentivization. If we were to make a swap, then you would think, it's common sense actually, that our numbers would keep going up, that the other side would figure out that this was a way to leverage us and they would keep taking Americans. But strangely, I've gone from 54, I'm now in between 20 and 30, so our numbers are actually starting to go down. One thing I'd love to do as time goes on is really throw some heavy research resources into this problem set so that when I say something before a body like this, we have the mathematics and the hardcore research to back it up. But right now what I can tell you is when I showed up without the Levinson Act, we had roughly 30. We went up to a point of 54, and now we're down hovering between 20 and 30, depending on how you slice and dice that.
Very good. I will now... Okay, we do have the request to add a member. Chair asks unanimous consent that the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Cloud, be allowed to sit on this dais and participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. Now the chair will recognize Mr. Allred for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this important hearing and for your focus on this issue. It is a bipartisan issue, and I want to thank our panel for joining us. And as a father of two young boys, I always say in all of my experience speaking with the families of folks who are wrongfully detained or hostages, I can only hope that I would go as far as I know all of y'all have gone, whether that's Deborah Tice, who for 12 years has been staying. I just met with her recently, or whether that's Malfine Fogel, who I also met with not long ago. Their commitment to their loved ones is inspiring to me and has, I think, remind all of us to keep going. Mr. Carstens, I just wanted to begin with you and touch on our experience together, and thank you for the work that we did in trying to bring home Brittany Griner. I want to just have folks out there who might be watching this to know that in all of our discussions about bringing home Brittany, we also talked about Paul Whelan and Mark Fogel. That this was a situation where we wanted to bring everyone home. And in this setting, I think the most that we can say is that it required us to have a partner who would actually do that trade. And the focus that I think you and I had over the course of our conversations and the classified briefings that you and your team were kind enough to organize was the understanding that this was going to be an incredibly difficult swap at some point. But I think it says a lot about us as Americans that we are willing to make that swap, and also that we'll do anything to bring Americans home, and that we're going to keep working on bringing Paul Whelan and Mark Fogel home. And so I want to thank your team for their hard work in that regard. And obviously, watching Brittany thrive now, and I think that's a testament to your hard work. And we have to keep working on bringing every American home. I wanted to come back to something that you mentioned about this being a global problem and needing a global solution. And if you could expand a bit upon that to give us some insight into what you think a broader response, pulling together all of our capacity, both with folks who we agree with and folks we disagree with, to try and set some standards and some rules of the road and bring to bear international pressure when hostage taking occurs or wrongfully detained occurrences.
Congressman, thank you for that. Now, and I would like to say that it was an honor to work with you to bring Brittany Griner home. I know you've also been working on Deborah Tice. And in fact, if I may out you, you've come to talk to me about cases that fell outside your jurisdiction. I think once you get involved in this business, you start to keep coming back to help. And I appreciate the broader support you've given us outside those who live in your district. I'd also like to say I appreciated your care for Paul Whelan, too. And you're right. Every time we talked about Brittany Griner, we were talking about Paul and others. And so the enemy gets a vote, as we used to say when I was in the military. And sometimes you'll find the people that are holding our Americans, they get a vote, they hold the key to the jail cell. And it's a pleasure to work together with you to find the ways to break that out. And I will say, it's not the executive branch that brings people home. It's not my office. It's all of us. When someone comes home, it has the thumbprint of Capitol Hill, NGOs, empowered individuals, partners, and allies. So it was great to work with you on those cases and bring someone home. Now, before you accuse me of running out the clock, allow me to answer your question. So I can picture a time when if we can build a multilateral coalition of 10 and then eventually 20 and then 30 countries where we all start working on those toolbox with those tools that Congressman Ron was talking about, to where when someone's taken from a country, let's say that a Swede is taken by Iran, these countries can come together, make a determination together that this person is arbitrarily detained by the country of Iran, and then approach Iran with this suite of tools along lines of effort that will one day finally show the Iranians that we're onto their game, we're coming together, and we're going to make it too costly for them to do this again. That day is coming. Now, is it going to happen 7 years from now or 17 years from now? I don't know. What I can tell you is I have 2 people on my team, soon 3, that do nothing but this. I have a deterrence team, and 24/7, they worry about deterrence. And we are on the phone 24/7 with people around the world trying to pull in this multilateral effort to try to get this done. We also appreciate the leadership of the Canadians in this regard. So we're going to get this done one day. It's going to become from a multilateral effort, which is supported by this legal team that I talked to you about, by reestablishing the norms and working with you to try to find the ways that we can partner to gain new authorizations as needed to address this issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I could just say one thing before I yield. We're going to have a classified briefing, and I know Deborah Tice is likely watching this or will be watching this. And Director Mon, I just want to say that I'll have some questions specifically about Austin's case, and hope that in the classified setting we can have a thorough discussion. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Allred. Chair now recognizes Ms. Sherfless McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would first want to recognize that the families who still have people who are detained, my heart goes out to them. And also I want to thank you for your help, because we had some constituents who were detained in Haiti who you helped their release, and I can't thank you enough for partnering with us in what you guys do. My question is that it's evident that the release of wrongfully detained victims is a complex issue with valid concerns on both sides. On one hand, there is a longstanding belief that any engaging in negotiations or trades with hostage takers would incentivize further hostage taking and wrongful detention, putting more American lives at risk. However, the Biden-Harris administration has taken a notable different approach, facilitating the release of over 47 Americans through various means, including exchanges, at a rate significantly higher than previous administrations. What, in your view, has been the consequence of these differences? And do you feel Americans are being taken hostage or wrongfully detained at higher rates because of the government has been willing to make trades?
Congresswoman, thank you for that question. Again, it almost defies common sense. I think 4.5 years ago when I took this job, I would have said if we were to do some of the things that we've done to bring people home, it would incentivize the other side. But the math just is not adding up. It's actually going down. It's going the other direction. So I'd love to do more research on this. I would love it. We're actually working with people from the RAND Corporation, for example, CSIS, and other places to try to do the mathematics to determine what is happening here in this space. But again, my numbers are actually going down.
Families who go through the horror of having a relatively wrongfully detained or taken hostage are suffering immense trauma. Having dealt with kidnappings in Haiti of members of my own district, I appreciate the work that you've done to provide comfort and resources for these families. However, in 2021, Republicans stripped the entire foreign affairs title containing the CFA family support legislation out of the annual state appropriations bill. It wasn't until 2023 that the House Democrats were able to negotiate with Republicans to get the provision passed in the state authorized package. Can you describe for the committee how the loss of this provision affected the work of CFA?
I might start off. I don't know if you want to jump in either, but I'll say that I think from our perspective, this will be a strange answer to the question, but when I took the job, we only had a few people, and we had to really understand how we were going to build it out and how we're going to approach this problem set. And very quickly over time, working with my chief of staff, we determined that for my group, we need a case team, a family engagement team, and a deterrence team. And then we spent the next few years trying to build it out. And so I would say that we might not have been well positioned to think about how to use those resources back then, whereas where we are right now, when it came time to talk to Capitol Hill about what we might need over the next year or so, last year we finally had our act together. We're able to talk to members of not only our administration through the OMB process, but also members on Capitol Hill about what those requirements might be and how we could put them into action. As the result is what happened in the 2024 NDAA, where you were kind enough to grant us additional authorities, appropriations are going to follow, and with that in mind, we're able to offer extra assistance and special assistance to people coming back from detentions, but also to take care of their family members. We are now, thanks to the help of Congress, able to provide mental health support and physical health support to the families of those detained while they're still detained. And once someone comes back, we're still able to continue that support and also take care of the detainee. So I think we're in a better place now to, I would say, manage the process, request the process, and work together with you to find out what those next needs might be and how best to work together. So I'm not sure if that answered the question, and I don't know if Rena, if you wanted to jump in on that.
Thanks, Roger. And I just want to make sure, I'm not sure I heard everything that you were mentioning, but I think I heard a question about resources, and I really would love the opportunity to mention that from our perspective, the most important thing that Congress can do is to fund the State Department. We are just in the Bureau of Consular Affairs, and I know Roger feels this way too, that we are just the forward deployed arm providing public services on behalf of the State Department, but it is really everybody in the State Department's job to support your constituents. And if the department is underfunded, it is just much harder for us to deliver.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Sherflis McCormick. Chair now recognizes Mr. McCormick for unrelated for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for the witnesses for being here today. I'm here to address a very serious issue about one of my constituents. Mr. Carsons, I sent you as well as the President and Secretary of State a letter on June 4th requesting that the matter of Tigran Gambaryan detainment be transferred to your office. I also wrote and received a response regarding Deputy Secretary Kurt Campbell's trip to Nigeria asking whether he discussed Tigran's case with their government. Tigran is my constituent, his wife and his 2 kids, and previously he served as an IRS agent taking high-level cases before working as a compliance executive at Binance. As you know, while on travel to Nigeria, by invitation by their government, he was arrested, had his passport seized, and has received appalling treatment with his rights continually being violated. He wasn't even charged for a month. He now has malaria, should be in the hospital, not. He's been lied about. We do have people in contact with him, but absolutely appalling circumstances. An American citizen. Most recently, Tigran contracted malaria while there. Despite a court order to the contrary, he has received less than adequate treatment, and it's time for him to come home. Special Envoy Carstens, in your view, does Mr. Gambaryan meet the criteria of a U.S. citizen wrongfully detained by a foreign government pursuant to the Robert Levingston Hostage Recovery and Hostage Taking Accountability Act?
Congressman, I hope you don't mind. I'll start off, and then Assistant Secretary Bitter may want to jump in, or maybe even Raj. But I would say that these cases are, they might from the outside seem opaque, that it's hard for people to figure out where we are in the map sheet as we go through this. And a lot of that's because the cases are not static. We keep finding information out over time.
Let me interrupt because we only have so much time. I have 3 more minutes because I'll cite your own code. Mm-hmm. And that way you can tell me if it applies or not. Or I'll probably just tell you because it's pretty obvious to me. Mr. Chairman, I ask for unanimous consent to submit to the record Section 1741 of Title 22 of the United States Code, please.
Without objection.
Thank you. Let's go through Section 1741 of Title 22, which you guys are pursuant to. Answer the questions to Mr. Gambaryan's case if it falls under these 8 criteria listed. Clause 1A, do United States officials receive or possess credible information indicating the innocence of the detained individual? Yes. Clause 5A, is the individual being detained in violation of laws of the detained country? Yes. We know that for a fact. Clause 6A, are independent non-government organizations or journalists raised legitimate questions about the innocence of the detained individual? Yes. Clause 7A, is the individual or the United States mission in the country where the individual is being detained received credible reports that detention is a pretext for an illegitimate purpose? Yes. Clause 8A, has the individual detained in a country where the Department of State has determined in its annual human rights reports that the judicial system is not independent or impartial, is susceptible to corruption, or is incapable of rendering just verdicts? Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to insert this report, 2023 Country Reports on Human Rights Practices, Nigeria, for the record.
Without objection.
This report finds that Nigeria has arbitrary arrests or detention, serious problems with independent judiciary, and a lot more than that. That's just one more section. Clause 9A, is the individual being detained in inhumane conditions? Yes. Not only is he not receiving adequate treatment for malaria, but in prison he's being held in a place that was built to hold Boko Haram and ISIS people, terrorists basically, as basically a businessman who was coaxed there under false pretense. Clause 10A, has due process of the law been sufficiently impaired so as to render the detention arbitrary? Yes. Held for a month, passport confiscated, no charges, no medical treatment. This is a U.S. citizen. Clause 11A, is the United States diplomatic engagement likely necessary to secure the release of the detained individual? Absolutely. Absolutely, was he saying in the military. If he was your parent or your son, I would make the case this would have already been elevated. If it was somebody of interest to the president or the secretary, this would have already been elevated. He is a U.S. citizen. If I was in Rome, back in Roman times, and I was Paul, the apostle, I'd say, I am a Roman citizen, and all of a sudden it goes where? To the emperor. Because I'm a citizen. This guy deserves better. Secretary Bitter, with it being established that Mr. Gambarian meets the criteria of wrongfully detained U.S. person, according to this old code, that's 8 sections of the code, can I ask for your avocation to elevate this to where it belongs so we can actually get something done for this poor guy who was coaxed in under false pretense to be charged illegitimately after waiting for a month? Please.
Thank you so much, Representative McCormick. And I also just want to acknowledge that the statement that you read the other day on behalf of his wife was very moving, and I appreciate you reading that into the record, and it was really very meaningful to hear. I think we're watching this case closely. We talk about this case quite frequently. And just to back up a little bit, 2 things to be aware of. We are aware of his medical condition. We've asked for humanitarian release based on his malaria. And also, just so you know, our colleagues in Nigeria have visited him, I think, at least 9 times since he was arrested just a couple of months ago. We know that there's a hearing upcoming that we will certainly be attending. So just to assure you and to assure Mrs. Gambarian as well, that this is something we are tracking really, really closely. We're watching the proceedings, and we're watching very carefully his health.
So I'm going to ask you again, will you advocate to elevate this to Special Envoy Carstens?
Thank you again. And as the way that we work together is that we talk about these cases all of the time.
Are you advocating to elevate this, ma'am? It's a simple question.
No, I appreciate that. I understand what you're saying. And I just want to be clear that this is something
I know you're
we're-
concerned.
Mr. McCormick, your time has expired, but there will be another round coming up here that you will have an opportunity if you wish to continue your line of questioning. Chair now recognizes Ranking Member of the full committee, Ranking Member Meeks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me start by thanking our distinguished witnesses for joining us today. Assistant Secretary of Consular Affairs Bitter, Special Presidential Envoy for Hostage Affairs Carstens, and Director of the Hostage Recovery Fusion Cell, Mr. Mon. The issue of wrongful detentions and hostage taking of Americans overseas is not only a matter of national concern, but also a deeply personal one for the families affected. These families continue to demonstrate remarkable strength and resilience in the face of unimaginable circumstances. And their steadfast advocacy for their loved ones, to me, is very inspiring. The Biden administration has made a commendable strides in addressing this issue and has successfully secured the release, I believe, at least 47 wrongfully detained Americans. And I'm grateful for that tireless work that you put forward. However, our mission is far from complete. Every American wrongfully detained or held hostage deserves our focused attention and relentless effort until they are safely home with their loved ones. And this will continue to require, of course, a whole of government approach with coordination across agencies, Congress, and non-governmental organizations. Recent legislative efforts have provided resources to support the families of wrongful detainees and hostages. And these measures are crucial in offering the necessary support and assistance to families during these very difficult times. I know the process of designating someone wrongfully detained has become a cause for anxiety for many families. And I'm worried about the potential politicization of this delicate issue. Congress designed this process with no timetable set so that each determination is based on an assessment of each case's unique circumstances. It is important to remember, however, that the lack of a determination does not mean a determination will never be made. The safety and security of our citizens abroad must remain our highest priority, and I hope it remains a bipartisan one. Using these cases for political gain creates unnecessary division and weakens our negotiating position with adversaries who exploit detained Americans as bargaining chips. as we continue, and I know moving around, number of things going on, you've had various testimonies that you've gone through. I hope that though we can have this hearing creates a better understanding, for us to better understand the risk of wrongful detention and how the United States government works collectively to bring those Americans wrongfully detained or held hostage home. But most importantly, I hope we learn that we can recognize the immense strength and courage of the families that are involved and recommit to using every resource in our disposal to achieve the safe return of every wrongfully detained American. And before I just yield back, I want to pose a quick question to any of our witnesses who might have a view on this. I'd like to ask you to clarify some of the details of the agreement we reached last year with the Iranian regime to release 5 Americans held wrongfully in Iran for years in exchange for moving $6 billion worth of funds from the South Korea to a more securely locked down account in Qatar for humanitarian purposes. Do you feel that the agreement made with Iran amounted to a ransom payment for the release of American detainees? Mr. Cass?
Ranking Member Meeks, thank you for your comments and thank you for that question as well. And I appreciate the support that you've given this entire enterprise over the last few years, and grateful for a chance to be at this hearing today and answer that question. I think for starters, and I think you already know this, that the Office of the Special Envoy for Iran led the negotiation. In this case, my office was responsible for, you could almost say, the logistics and the safe movement and medical care of people coming back from Iran back to the United States, where they went into post-isolation support. But what I can say about the deal is that right now there are 5 Americans that are home with their families in the United States of America, and there's $6.2 billion where not $1 has spent. It is sitting safely secure in Qatar, overwatched by the Department of Treasury. That money was taken from an Iranian-owned bank, or account, I should say, in the Republic of South Korea, moved to a much, much more restricted account in Qatar, where the Department of Treasury, as I said, has oversight, and that money can only be used for humanitarian assistance. And used for humanitarian assistance in such a way that not $1 will ever go into Iran. It could be used with third-party vendors who might supply humanitarian goods such as baby formula, COVID vaccines, medical equipment, agricultural items. But again, to date, not $1 has been spent. That money, $6.2 billion, remains secure in Qatar with the Department of Treasury overwatch.
Thank you. So, would you consider that a win for us, or was it akin to avoiding a hold our nose?
I mean, if I were to just put it in plain terms, we got 5 people for nothing. We got 5 people back, and we allowed some money to be moved into a much more restricted account.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member Meeks. We're going to move to another round, but it doesn't look like it's going to be a long round of questioning. I'll begin with myself. We do have 2 families, or representatives of families here, family of Alsu and family of Evan, representatives of Evan in the audience. And so I did want to say, Ambassador Carstens, if there's, especially in light of what we see taking place today, coming on the news, if there's any update that you want to take time to provide right now, I think the audience would appreciate hearing it. We'd appreciate hearing it.
I mean, just briefly, as of today, Evan's detention and the investigative process has ended. An indictment's been issued. He has one more appeal that he can make, appealing his detention. But what's most likely going to happen before the 30th of June is that Evan will be moved from where he's currently held in Lefordova prison to instead Yekaterinburg. And when he gets out to Yekaterinburg, that's where the trial process most likely will start. I will tell you that if it's anything like what happened to Brittany Griner, Paul Whelan, Trevor Reed, there'll be a period when he leaves Lefordova where we won't have any contact with him. It'll almost be like it's gone dark. But eventually, an American, or I would say a detainee, surfaces in Yekaterinburg, and we'll have a chance to reestablish that connectivity from there. Rena Bitter might want to jump in on this, but the bottom line is that this was not unexpected. I think we were all hopeful that we were able to broker a deal with the Russians before this happened, but it doesn't stop or slow us down. We can keep continuing to pursue not only Evan's freedom, but also Paul Whelan's freedom as well. And did you want to add anything to that? Okay.
And Alsu as well, if you'd like to give any update there. And Ms. Bitter, you'll have the chance also.
I think it might be better to talk about some of the details in a classified setting. And again, Rena may want to jump in on this, but we're taking a look at that case. I mean, the spotlight's on it. It's, as you know, the president called for her release when he was at the correspondence dinner not too long ago. And there are other ways to garner someone's release, which Rena could probably talk about, but it's a case that I probably wrestle with every day, but it's not yet been declared to be a wrongful detention yet. And Rena, do you want to add anything on that?
Maybe in the closed setting.
In the closed setting, or if that's okay, we can add some more details and some color in the classified setting.
We will have that opportunity,
Thank
no
you.
doubt. I do want to ask one other question, maybe two, Mr. Mon, and that is just inevitably there will be classified conversations that are declassified, I guess, at some level to have conversations with the family. And who is that authority that you're seeing prior to this rising all the way to the level of the president, let's say, a more immediate authority that's going to make that decision?
So our declassification goes through OD&I, and they'll reach out to the appropriate agency to get the information declassified so we can pass it on to the families. I'm sorry, did I answer your question?
You answered it.
Mr. Chairman, can I jump in on that too?
Please
Is that
elaborate.
Not necessarily on the hostage side, but on the wrongful detention side, you may not know, but I have two people from OD&I that are embedded in my team. They're actually with my team. I've had another member of the intelligence agency that's embedded in my team full time. And so it's actually increased our connectivity from the State Department to the intelligence side of the house. But the reason we have this relationship with OD&I is to declassify information. It's actually what the president expects of me. It's what you expect of us. As possible, declassify information and let the family know what's going on, where we are in that case. So again, two people that are embedded on my team that are working on declassifying information, pretty much all the time.
Would you say in that circumstance that the information is literally declassified or there's just an access given?
Oh, it's absolutely declassified. I mean, we've taken some pretty high-level stuff and just run it through the ringer. They've done. I guess you could say all the equities checks to make sure that sources and methods are protected, and then we'll bring the family in and say, okay, here's some extra information that you didn't have before, just declassified. Here's what we want to share with you.
Okay, I appreciate that. Any advices that you want to give on where you think Congress should offer something more to assist with that, to assist with some resource, some authority you feel like you might need to better conduct these operations?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll always take more money. So if you, but to be honest, I think
I
we've-
appreciate that,
Yeah.
but I certainly expect a more thoughtful answer than you want more money.
I think you might have the wrong guy. As I said, I'm not that smart. But I will say, what the good thing about this is you asked us to do this, and we took that seriously because we spend so much time with the families. And sometimes you'll sit there and feel the tension of not being able to say just a little more. And so what you asked of us, we were, in a way, kind of eager to do. And so thanks to Congress and the authorities that you have given us, we've been trying to turn that into, I guess, action and actually have these people with us almost full time to declassify the information. So if there are ways that we can come up with that will speed up the process or increase our ability to provide this information, I'd love to explore that with your teams. But we hope that we're kind of hitting the mark on your expectations in this regard.
And to go back to just the conversation about declassification as well, it is important for Pavel to hear, for other family members, representatives, you name it, to be able to hear that information. So
Okay.
we appreciate any work that you can do on those fronts. Mr. Crow, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Currently, 9 countries' travel pages are tagged with a D indicator: Afghanistan, Burma, China, Eritrea, Iran, Nicaragua, North Korea, Russia, and Venezuela. Ambassador Bitter, could you talk to us for a moment about the role of these travel advisories in attempts to warn Americans about the risk of wrongful detention, how you arrive at these determinations?
Thank you, Representative Crowe. I'd be happy to. First of all, one thing I should say is just to thank this committee, thank the members of this committee and other members of Congress. Our travel advice, again, as I said, is really the service that we provide to Americans before they leave the country in order to help them make decisions about their safety and security when traveling overseas. Many members of this committee have amplified our travel advice. We work very closely with your constituent services teams in order to be able to share information that you can share with your constituents. We consider your constituents our constituents, so we're always very grateful about that. It's true, one of the things that we advise about all kinds of risks to Americans in our travel advice. Crime, maybe even the state of the medical system there, natural disasters, terrorism, and recently working with a broad array of State Department offices, we've included a D indicator to alert Americans when they may be visiting a country that does participate in wrongful detention. The D indicator is there are really basically two reasons that we would include it, and we very thoughtfully worked with our colleagues across the department to identify them. If there is a wrongful detainee and also a credible ongoing risk of wrongful detention, which is not unique to an individual person, and in some instances, and you've mentioned them, for example, North Korea, there may not be a wrongful detainee there currently, but there is a credible ongoing risk. So if we see that, those two indicators in place, we'll put a D indicator on the travel advice.
Thank you. And currently, the House Republicans' proposal for the State and Foreign Ops bill has a proposed 11% cut to the State Department. How would such a cut impact your staff and your team and your ability to perform the work at the level that you would envision it to be performed within the context of wrongful detained and hostages?
Well, thanks for the question. And again, it's within this context, but everything that we do, we are part of the State Department, and we just happen to be the forward deployed arm of providing public services. But it is something that everybody in the State Department is part of. We rely completely on the strength of the State Department in order to be able to do what we do. You're probably aware that we're fee funded, but again, we rely on the folks that do the computers, the hiring, everything. We sit on the platform that the State Department has. The thinner the platform, the weaker it is, the less we're able to do for your constituents. And I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that our Bureau, which is fee-funded, experienced a $902 million rescission this year.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Crowe. This will continue in a classified setting. I don't necessarily need a closing statement. I don't know if you need then I'll just close this out in the formal way that we need to before we move to the classified setting. I thank the witnesses for your testimony. I really do thank you for your testimony today, and other members for their questions. If other members of the subcommittee have some additional questions for the witnesses, we will ask that you respond to those questions in writing. Pursuant to committee rules, all members may have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to length limitations. Without objection, this committee in this portion stands adjourned.